We're going to touch on just some highlights of a really in-depth quantitative research project that we've been working on, say, in partnership with Walpole and with the incredibly generous partnership with Lucid, who are our field partners in this piece of research. So we'll touch on some highlights today, but there's lots more data and detail for anyone who's interested to chat to me more about it in our many coffee breaks. So I think we just wanted to start by saying that there's so many exciting things that we're hearing about, for example, today, and more often than not, incredible stories that pop up all the time, in the news and media as we enter a new decade of. There's so much, change in the world. There's disruption being led by technology, and it can feel incredibly overwhelming. There's so much choice, and with that choice comes just incredible complexity. So as a business owner, trying to work out how to navigate that and to work out what's important for you as a business is something that's crucially important. And I think one of the biggest luxuries for all businesses these days is time. So how do you actually work out how to navigate all of this complexity and decide what's important for you and your business? We think the answer is actually quite simple. And the way to navigate that complexity is to truly understand who your customer is and to put that insight and understanding right at the heart of your business decision making. And I think we have to ask ourselves a question, which is, how well do we really know our customers? We know quite often those who buy with us very regularly, and we understand their habits in relation to how they behave with us. But what about all of the people that you don't know yet because they haven't discovered you, or because they represent the future and the next generation? So properly getting under the skin of who they are, what motivates them, and how to find them offers a brilliant, simple roadmap, really a compass to navigate complexity and be able to decide, of all the amazing things that we're going to hear over the rest of the day, what's important for you. So our approach to developing that understanding is really, we call it a panoramic approach, because, as we saw from the Global Blue presentation this morning, not all luxury customers are created equal. So your average billionaire, ultra high net worth is not the same as a mass luxury customer. There's a lot of these guys. They might not be spending so much, but you can reach them by using really big, good quantitative research methodology. Whereas if you do really want to get under the skin of what your ultra high net worth guys are doing, you really need to understand them on an individual level and on a person by person basis. So you need different techniques to do that. So we have a very rounded panoramic approach that blends quantitative research, really understanding perspectives from industry insiders who work within the luxury and fashion industries, and then those who have direct relationships. And we blend all of that together to really get under the skin of the different forces driving luxury behaviour. So today, out of all of those things that we do look at, we're going to focus on really understanding the mass luxury customer. So we have undertaken a very rigorous quantitative research project. We've interviewed, I think it's nearly 5,000 people now across the UK and the US, working, as I say, with Lucid, our partners, to help us field that, to really get under the skin of the mass luxury customer. And what we've done is segment them into 10 different clusters based on their differing attitudes and motivations towards luxury. And it's really important for us to segment them like that, because once we separate people and then into clusters based around what makes them tick, then we can understand those groups of like-minded people, and it really, really helps us. So what we're focusing on today, though, is really understanding within the UK, amongst these segments, and focusing in on the next generation of luxury customers. So those people who are labelled Gen Z, because they reach up to that age category of about 16 to 24. So some highlights, 10 things that we think every luxury brand needs to know about this age group. And I'm going to start by saying that the one thing I think we should all do is stop calling Gen Z or Gen Z, depending on which part of the pond you're on. Let's stop calling them that, because actually we're trying to define a group of people purely based on their age. But shockingly, people are different. And it's astonishing. Thank you for my true insight into the market. So of the 10 segments that we have identified in the luxury segment, in the luxury market, there are 4 where Gen Z are more overrepresented than others. So we'll focus on those as we go forward to look at what's important to them. But the critical thing to really take away is that they are a diverse and large group of people who have different needs and different motivations, and we should actually start by understanding those needs and motivations first and foremost, rather than just the age bracket that they occupy. So, when we look to the segments and to really understand what does motivate them, the thing that's really interesting with this group of people is they don't really care about the heritage of the luxury brands that they're buying, which is potentially quite concerning for many luxury brands who have always traded, on the longevity of the brand and the business. So when we look at a segment called high stylists, who are the most highly engaged and the highest value segment in the market, we see that they are incredibly passionate about the luxury world and they're incredibly passionate about the brands they love. But what they don't tell us is that they're particularly interested in the heritage of the brand. Now, that's not to say that heritage isn't important, because we know that authenticity and not creating false stories is really crucial to this audience. But what's critical is that brands take that heritage and use it as a way to tell incredibly powerful, contemporary and culturally relevant stories. And we've just seen, Burberry on the stage and, as the masters of people who've achieved that. So it's not to throw away heritage, but it's to use it as a way of really being contemporary as a brand. The next insight that we have pulled out is that really there's an amazing opportunity for luxury brands in particular, which is to become what we call a cultural access point for your customers. So there's a large segment that represent 16% of all Gen Z, and that is the experimentalists. And that is a group of people who are very much using the luxury goods they buy and the experiences that they seek as a way of really exploring and expressing their sense of identity. And quite often for this group of people, that's driven by their life stage as well. They're trying to work out, their place in the world. And for this group of people, not only are they incredibly passionate about things like design, film, music, they're also looking and actively seeking out luxury brands as a source of inspiration. And they're going to the websites and they're using the social channels and they're very active. So for brands to really help these group of people to express themselves and to offer them access to the cultural passions, music, film that they love, is a huge opportunity, because the two can come together perfectly. Now, let's talk about influencers. Influencers, I don't think, are 3 or 4, people with big enough Instagram followings to be able to get a spot on the front row at Fashion Week anymore. That is one type of influencer. Actually, what's really, really interesting is the largest segment where Gen Z are prevalent are what we call aspirational admirers. This is 20% of them. Now, this group of people are obsessed with fashion and luxury. They cannot get enough of it. They just don't have the economic means yet to be able to buy into it as often as they'd like to, but they will. So these are incredibly important for luxury brands in the future, because they will be the buyers that will support the business in the coming years. However, it's important to not only attract them now so they buy later, but also to remember these guys are your free media channel, because they're the ones that are consuming the communications, the content, they're sharing it, they're talking about it. They're the ones that make the brand aspirational and incredibly exciting for those who do purchase it. So thinking about these guys now and bringing them on board and letting them just proudly share your brand and your communication is something that every luxury brand should be thinking about. So, retail. Now, everything that we hear is that, of course, your average Gen Z is on their mobile. They're not thinking about going into shops. They're price checking, and they're not interested. That's not what we see in the data. What we see in the data is that the two most highly engaged segments, our high stylists and our experimentalists, want to go into retail because they want to enjoy the experience. They want to see it as a source of inspiration, and they actually really want to engage with the retail staff to be able to get that personal information and to to really feel like they're enjoying the experience. So the crucial difference is that they're seeing retail as a place of experience, not just as a place of transaction. And that's something that, when brands acknowledge that, and we see examples like Carlos Place that, for example, that Matches have created, thinking about them as hybrids of not just shopping spaces, but also experience spaces, there's great examples of success there. Which brings us quite neatly on to the next point. So the one thing I'd say that comes out of all of the data that we looked at, and this is consistent across all segments, is that that fundamental shift that I think we've all been talking about for a little while is that people are incredibly passionate about experiences over possessions. So, over 60% of all mass luxury customers believe that experiences and travel are more important than buying nice things. And that is something that we've seen increase over time and is probably only set to continue. That doesn't mean that they never want to buy anything tangible, but it just means the relationship is different. The tangible object is what we call the souvenir of their experience. It's the thing they take away as a memory of the amazing experience that's being created for them. And as we see in increase in wealth and things like that, it's easier to acquire possessions. The rarity and the uniqueness that comes from experience is something that's absolutely integral and needs to be baked into every forward-thinking marketing plan. So, another thing that's presumably supposed to be dead and buried and in the gutter for our Gen Z, the magazine. Now, there are, as we know, many challenges around publishing, but what we are seeing is some really exciting happenings in the independent sector with publishing and magazines, and that are really flourishing. And the forward-thinking brands are those who have really understood the role that printed material can play in the younger audience's lives. So actually, that experimental segment that I talked about earlier, they are almost half of them regularly read magazines and actively see them as a source of inspiration. The difference is that where it's moving to is you've got things like The Face relaunching as a beautiful quarterly publication. You've got Highsnobiety, which is the big online digital platform creating quarterly publications. What they're creating are very beautiful, tangible moments where people can pause, really enjoy, indulge, and crucially collect. And that's playing a different role in people's lives. And then what they're also doing is slightly shifting from what historically used to be being an access point into all the interesting things that are happening in culture. The internet's got that covered now. Instead, what they're offering is a way of really curating and joining the dots between the most interesting parts of culture. So becoming that brilliant and authoritative voice. We were chatting to Jason Gonzalez, who's the global brand director of The Face, and he said that he very much saw their role as shifting from being a publisher to being a creator of culture, and that their role was to no longer just comment on it, but it was to actively create it. And it's really interesting to see the collaboration they've done with Gucci. So if you want to buy a £900 Gucci The Face sweatshirt, you can't, because it's sold out within 24 hours of going on the website. So on to sustainability, which I will in no way pretend to talk as authoritatively as the previous panellists. But what's really interesting in the data that we're seeing is that we're at a real inflection point with sustainability. So there is a small, but I would say growing segment who we've labelled sustainable idealists, who represent 4% of all mass luxury customers, but 8% of Gen Z. So Gen Z are overrepresented in this group. And this is a group for whom it is the number one most important thing. So it is the primary driver of all the goods that they purchase. However, these guys at the moment aren't the biggest buyers in the category. What's really interesting is the ones who are buying big, the high stylists, the experimentalists that I've just talked about, it's really, really important for them as well. They're just not saying it's the primary driver yet, so they still want to buy into a brand because they love the dream and the vision and the world that it's selling. But if it's not sustainable, it falls away. So it's got to be there. And so our key takeout is that sustainability is absolutely table stakes for luxury brands today. And you just don't necessarily have to talk about it, you just have to do it, which, as I think we've already heard, is a little bit more complicated than that. But it has to happen, I think. And as part of that, that leads neatly on to our next point, which is what we're seeing is shifts not only in supply and the way that brands are able to, for example, be more sustainable, but also demand. So the way that people are shopping and people's purchase and consumption habits are shifting. And it's really interesting when we look at the data to see how people are, and especially in the younger age groups, moving away from the desire for fast fashion and something new every sort of outfit every time you go out, and really desiring to save up for a more occasional and extravagant purchase. And that's partly driven by a desire to be more sustainable and to buy fewer but better, but we're also seeing a shift towards people wanting to really identify pieces or experiences or objects that are unique and bespoke to them that they can keep and cherish for a long time. So I think that's incredibly encouraging for us all in the room today, and things that last. So finally, I'd say in conclusion to our highlights of the research that we found, I think probably the biggest trend out there is that there really aren't any trends at the moment. The key is individuality, and people want to stand out from the crowd. They want to find things that are unique to them and that allow them to express themselves. I mean, luxury's always been about identity and about scarcity, and so we're seeing that manifest in so many different ways now. The rise of resale sites, vintage, the desire for unique experiences, they all really are symptoms of an overwhelming sort of trend, which is that there really is no obvious trends. I mean, one of the reasons I think we talk about Gen Z as we came at the beginning is because we used to be able to define decades broadly in what that decade meant culturally. The 60s has a very evocative air to it, as does the 70s. We struggle to do that as we've moved into the 21st century. So instead we turn to demographic bands to try and help us navigate and understand what people are doing. So I think it's probably not quite as simple as that. So our conclusion overall is that we think that truly understanding your audience really is the way to navigate through all of the exciting choices and complexity that the 21st century landscape brings us. And actually, with that understanding, is a huge opportunity for brands to capitalise and really excel. So we do believe that your customer strategy is as important as your as your commercial strategy. So if you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.
Quite bright. It is really bright, isn't it? We've got time for a couple of questions if you have any questions from the floor, or we can also save those for coffee as well. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you.
Hi. Given the number of sort of consumer segments and groups that you identify there, how does a brand define its language and its priorities in speaking to them, given there are so many? Or does it need to define for itself what the language and qualities it focuses on, and then hope that the consumers come to it from the relevant demographic?
I think that's a really interesting question, especially and we talk about this a lot with luxury brands, where a brand having a really strong sense of vision and identity, and that becoming a springboard for, you know, amazing creativity. I think that's really important. So I would always say that the opportunity is for brand to truly understand itself and to truly have that incredible creative vision, but then use deep audience understanding to find the people who are going to be most excited and inspired by that, rather than shaping yourself to the whims of others.
Any more questions? Oh, terrific. We'll do some more questions. Oh, sorry, there's a question. Apologies. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask what you wondered the future of ownership looked like in terms of seeing the sustainability agenda, seeing the rental market move, seeing all of these things, you know, and that concept of that piece around, you know, packaging, all of those things, that idea of just, you know, what the future might look like from an ownership point of view.
So the data that we have, it gives us a pulse read of where people are currently, and what we've seen is that there's a really big increase in, especially the most highly engaged segments, in elements of circularity around things like resale sites and vintage and things like that. So I can only imagine that's going to increase. I think the slightly away from what this data tells us. My personal opinion is we're trying to balance what the system can offer people and what people want, and so that supply and demand can align. So I think the more that it's offered to people, the more they will want it, and that will create a virtuous circle. But at the moment, we're at the beginning of that journey.
Terrific. Thank you. If there's no more questions, woman, thank you very much, Jenny. Great insightful things.